I'm sure it's going to be a busy few hours for you, David. Let's talk Nicholas Jackson first of all. How do you see this ending? Any chance he can still get this move?
Morning, guys. Yeah, of course it's still possible that he could move to Bayern Munich, but on a permanent basis. Chelsea, as I understand it, will not countenance a loan now. And so let's see if that can develop into a full-time opportunity. Because as things stand, Nicholas Jackson is still a Chelsea player. He's contracted to them. And unless something changes, they'll expect him to come back into Enzo Maresca's first team squad for what's an incredibly busy time in both domestic and European competition. So we'll just have to wait and see how that unfolds. Chelsea obviously aren't going to leave themselves short. And on that note, I've just reported that Chelsea are actually exploring options now in the transfer market to potentially sign another striker on a permanent basis. I don't think there is a great deal of options to bring in a loan, and so they're scouring potential opportunities, including, I believe, Conrad Harder of Sporting Club in Portugal. He's believed to be one of a number of options that they're surveying as they sort of weigh up this extraordinary situation.
You mentioned that they're scouring the market. How likely is it that they can get someone this late? And you mentioned Harder there. Has he been a long-term target for Chelsea, or has it just come along now because of what's turning into a saga with Jackson and Liam Delap's injury?
Well, as you know, Dums, there's always time in the market to get things done. We've got today and until 7 p.m. on Monday, and it's remarkable how quickly things come about when clubs need to get business done, despite having had the whole summer to do it. And we've been in these situations before. Even unexpected transfers arise late or at the last minute. Harder is a player that many clubs have been looking at. He's just 20 years old, and in this small pool of number nines in football at the moment, where supply is completely outweighed by demand, he's one who has been assessed and is on the radar of some of the biggest clubs. I think RB Leipzig have been looking at him heavily since the departure of Benjamin Sesko in particular. Premier League clubs have sort of weighed up moves for Harder, and I don't think he will have just suddenly come into Chelsea's thinking. And he's a player who does have the sort of attributes that could really suit a team like Chelsea, despite being young and not having played that much last season. So it's interesting, but they'll have others too. And, their recruitment team has done a lot of trading in recent years. And so we don't know that a move for Harder is going to develop, but he's among those that they're looking at as this frenzy of activity continues.
Julian, David Ornstein there mentions Conrad Harder. Is he the answer for Chelsea? What do you know about him?
I don't think so. He was Victor Gyökeres' backup. Obviously, that's why he didn't play much, like David just said. But for Sporting to then let both go in the summer is because they clearly didn't see him as a suitable replacement for Gyökeres, who left for Arsenal. Rennes for a long time were the only club who had an agreement with Sporting for him. And that's just Rennes in Ligue 1, who finished 15th last season. Then Milan looked into him, had an agreement, decided not to go through. And now Leipzig, like David said, is the one seemed to be leading this race, but he's been offered to a lot of clubs, and a lot of them were not too keen either, probably because he hasn't played too much last season. There's potential there, but again, Chelsea need more, I think, than potential right now.
David, how much do you think Harder would cost?
It's a very good question, especially so late in the market. But given what Julian says there about his lack of action last season and the potential, and clearly some reservations at clubs as well about whether he's suitable, certainly, not an outrageous figure. Sporting Club really drove a hard bargain, as hard as they could for Gyökeres, but this would be a much lower fee if they were to consider it. But of course, they'll need to think about their own squad and how that's shaping up in the season ahead in terms of their decision to potentially release him.
David, it looks like it's going to be a very dramatic end to this window. It's been a dramatic window and a long one, I'm sure you'll agree, up until now, not least at Liverpool. They've had a fantastic window so far, and it could end with the highest of highs, not one, but potentially two. Mark Guehi, and I'm going to say Those two words we've been saying every single day in this window, Alexander Isak. How likely, one or both?
Well, Liverpool are still interested in both of them for sure, and we've certainly not heard the last of it. I don't think Liverpool are sort of actively doing much at the moment around the Isak situation, because they will have felt that their £110 million offer was the place that pretty much they were prepared to go. We know previously they had indicated a willingness to do a deal at around £120 million. So of course, there'll be a bit of wiggle room on their part, but I don't necessarily see them wanting to go much or any higher than that. And Newcastle have been completely clear in their stance that they don't intend to sell Isak this summer, and that they would expect something like £150 million for him. Let's see if that proves to be the case by the end of the window. Maybe they stick to their guns, or maybe there's a compromise that is to be reached. I'm not sure about this notion of new bids coming in. Maybe Liverpool sit back and see if Newcastle come to them and open the door, because Newcastle have committed a significant amount of money, what, €75 million at least on their new signing, Voltemade. And they've made a lot of other recruitments as well, in terms of Elanga and Ramsey. Obviously, Ramsdale was a loan. They brought in Thiaw from AC Milan, and they're still in the market. They've got interest in Strand Larsen and Visser. I don't know if there are other options also. And you've got to ask yourselves whether that could lead to an Isak departure for financial reasons as much as footballing reasons. The fact that he doesn't want to be there, clearly he's intent on making this Liverpool move, and it seems he expects it to happen before the deadline. It feels there's an increasing expectation across the industry, but that doesn't really count for that much, that he will go. One condition has clearly been met in terms of Newcastle describing conditions for sale in their statements, and that's Voltemade coming in. But not all of the conditions, which is another attacking reinforcement, we think, and having a suitable offer. And the question in this last 24 hours or so is, will those other two conditions be met to allow him to complete what he would like to do, join Liverpool, and Liverpool's interest remains firm. In terms of Mark Guehi, yeah, an offer, £35 million was formalised, as I revealed yesterday, and Palace have got to decide what to do about this. Do they want to sell him? Can they get a replacement? I think that will be key. Will he play today? I think that's also a factor in the equation. If the clubs reach an agreement, and they've got good relations, talks have been cordial from what I hear, then Mark Guehi would be keen on the move for sure. But there's a lot of ifs in there. There's a lot of ifs in the Isak situation. There are no guarantees. And that's why, of course, Liverpool are going to be one of the main clubs to watch before 7 p.m. tomorrow night.
They certainly are. Alison, we'll talk more Alexander Isak after the break, but I do want to pick up on the Mark Guehi situation. Clearly, there's one side with Liverpool interested and wanted to bring in a centre-half, but let's look at the other side. Crystal Palace have just lost. They lost Michael Olise last summer. Eberechi Eze has already gone to Arsenal, and now they're potentially losing the FA Cup final winning captain, Community Shield winning captain. Degree of sympathy for Oliver Glasner and Crystal Palace in this final hours of this window, isn't there?
Well, I mean, Oliver Glasner has said he'll put his boots back on, won't he, if they lose Mark Guehi, because he's going to be down to his bare bones, and that's one way of telling the ownership this is getting ridiculous. Well, would like to point out Mark Guehi has conducted himself impeccably throughout all the speculation. He's turned out for his club, not just turned out for his club, he's played well, and he's still been the captain and the leader, and you would not be able to tell from his demeanour or his performances that he's at the heart of a transfer speculation or even transfer battle, whereas you've got two other characters, well, more than that in football, who are withdrawing their services. So the psychology of it is fascinating, and you kind of think, well, surely everyone should look to Mark Guehi and see this is the way you do it, isn't it? Well, there's no disadvantage to turning up for the club that pays your salary and putting in excellent performances. There's no downside. The people who want you will want you even more, and the fans you're playing for will let you go with love in their heart because you did nothing wrong.
The only downside, I guess, Charlie, for Crystal Palace is they probably wanted this to happen much earlier in the window to get some sort of clarity and then have more time to ensure that all the replacements were in, bed them in during pre-season. But now you're in that situation where, with a day to go, he's still a Crystal Palace player, and come tomorrow night, he might not be.
Well, that's why I hope he remains a Palace player. I really do. I'd like to see him stay at the club, help Palace win a European trophy, get them into Europa League, where they should have been now. And for me, that'd be a great way to go. And as Alison said, I think, you know, it's refreshing that he's not been sort of bashing down the door at Palace to leave. But clearly, yeah, he's interested in the move there. And yeah, it's just come too late for me. Palace would obviously still be able to get a replacement. It's not going to be as good as Guehi. Obviously, they've left, already lost Eze. So I would just absolutely love to see him in Leipzig, where the final is of the Conference League next May, and lifting that trophy.
David, just coming back to you, in part one, we're talking about Manchester United and their recruitment so far in this transfer window. Goalkeepers at Manchester United, it seems a really hot topic. Do we expect incomings and maybe outgoings at United in that department in the final few hours?
It's definitely an area that Manchester United are looking at, whether it's addressed now or ends up happening subsequently in January or next summer. They've clearly got a bit of an issue in terms of whether there's a market for Andre Onana. It doesn't seem to be the case at the moment. You never know before the deadline. Maybe more plausible, you could move on Alti Bayern, but he's playing at the moment. So yeah, it's plausible one more comes in, and that will give them an excess of goalkeepers, but they do clearly have the issue of the Africa Cup of Nations on the horizon, and they want to upgrade in that area. That's been long understood. And so Senna Lammens of Royal Antwerp is a player they've looked at and they have an interest in. I don't think the situation has ever been as advanced as some have suggested, but let's see what develops on that front. And then, of course, there are continued reports around Emi Martinez, who they made a loan inquiry for earlier in the window. It didn't develop then. Let's see if it does now. Villa, the suggestion from them until this point has been they expect Emi Martinez to stay, despite what we saw from him at the end of last season in that very emotional scene on the pitch that looked like a departure was coming. So yeah, there could be a bit of activity in that area for Man United. The midfield is of interest, whether there could be a last-minute loan or they stick with their current options. So United are one, of course, to keep an eye on.
Alison, it's clearly an area that Manchester United do want to strengthen in. And I guess Ruben Amorim is kind of sending thinly veiled messages. What he did with Rasmus Højlund, took him out of the squad completely. The number one goalkeeper last season was Andre Onana. Now you're on the bench for the last two Premier League games, even though you were number one last season. And clearly there's so much criticism being aimed not only towards Onana, but the one who's in goal at the moment in Altay Bayındır. Is this something not only that they need to do, but they have to do in these final few hours?
I would say it was a priority, simply because what we've seen from Manchester United is a team that are lacking confidence. They look like they need direction. You so often get that from a very strong goalkeeper, like character like Emi Martinez. You feel like he sort of embodies so much of what's strong about Aston Villa last season. You look to the goalkeeper these days, they not only have to command their area and talk to their defence, and they're often captains for that reason. They're very good at sort of organising, but they also set in motion forward attacks. You want goalkeepers that are eye-catching, commanding, send out a message to any young players in the squad, remind them of their formation, especially when you've got one that's not really working at Manchester United. I would say the critical, I agree with you, Jules, about the midfield pivot. Okay, put that to one side. A lot of the problems we've got at the moment would have been solved with a really strong, reliable, eye-catching, commanding personality at the back.
United do have two eye-catching goalkeepers, don't they?
The wrong reason.
Totally wrong reason.
David, just before you go, because I know you're a very, very busy man, in the final few hours, we've been mentioning all of these clubs. We've been mentioning Isak, Liverpool, what Newcastle could do, what Manchester United could do, and any other clubs we should be keeping an eye on, and any other players that could make a move in these final few hours.
I think we need to wait for the conclusion of Arsenal's pursuit of Piero Hincapié. Obviously, an agreement reached between the clubs, but they've still got to finalise that deal, get him over, and complete the acquisition with Jakub Kiwior heading to Porto. So Arsenal, yeah, interesting. Can they get any more players out, like your Fabio Vieiras, Reece Nelson, Alexander Zinchenko? It's proved tough so far, but things can move late. I think Kevin and Fulham is an interesting one. Obviously a very impressive Shakhtar Donetsk player. It looks like it could be a big transfer for Fulham. Everton did so much or needed so much business in the market. They've done a lot so far. Jack Grealish and being at the forefront of that. And could they do some more, because they needed to in the preceding weeks. And yeah, there's loads that could go on. Newcastle obviously still active, and if players leave, you know, replacements are sought. So that might be the case at Wolves or a Brentford. So yeah, West Ham active as well. Lucas Paquetá is a player that's been heavily linked with Aston Villa, loan with an option or obligation, I think was reported. But West Ham are staunch in saying he's not going anywhere.